As I mentioned last night, the Victorian Opposition has written to the state's auditor-general to investigate more than $60 million worth of taxpayer contracts handed to private security companies involved in last year's botched hotel quarantine program. Victorian Shadow Minister for Police Liberal MP David Southwick has asked the Auditor-General to pay particular close attention to how one firm, Unified Security, landed a $30 million contract from the Andrews government. As I told you before, you'll remember, all on the back of a couple of text messages in 6 hours flat. This is despite a company closely linked to Unified operating under an almost identical name and from the same Sydney address collapsing into liquidation, owing more than $4 million. Now, I'm not suggesting that any illegal phoenixing took place here, but what I am saying is that the Auditor-General should look at this letter from David Southwick very carefully. David Southwick joins me now from Melbourne. David, what exactly have you asked the Auditor-General to look into?
Yeah, good evening, Peter. What you've said at the beginning of this program is absolutely spot on. We have real issues with the decisions that were made by the Andrews Labor government to give contracts to companies, especially Unified, when Unified were not even on a panel, an approved panel, to be awarded a contract in the first place. So $60 million was awarded to 3 companies. Unified received $30 million of that, and they weren't part of an approved panel. They were already under a cloud with a number of issues in New South Wales. And you fast forward to today, and in New South Wales, we've had Unified Security that have been deregistered. And a few weeks earlier, the Victorian government has given a 3-year licence renewal for Unified for Security. So there have been lots of issues here. We want the Auditor-General to investigate this. And I must say that Daniel Andrews, back in 2018, promised an investigation into an industry that was already under a cloud, the security industry. We are still waiting for that report. That report is in Daniel Andrews' desk at the moment. And we would not have been in this mess if Daniel Andrews hadn't decided to use security in the first place. And what we're seeing here is a whole lot of questionable practices about these licences that have been awarded, and we need to get to the truth. Victorians deserve the truth. They deserve answers because up until this point, we haven't received any of them.
Yeah, and you're right to say that Unified has been deregistered in New South Wales now. It's appealed that decision via the Civil and Administrative Tribunal. It's been granted a 1-month stay. But, it comes at a time that Victorians, as you rightly say, extended their licence to operate in this state for another 3 years. I might add that the bloke who negotiated all of those contracts in that 6-hour window in March and early April last year on hotel quarantine, well, that bloke was never fronted the court inquiry. He might have been called, there were certainly submissions, but he never gave evidence in the end. I think there's a lot of questions, and I think how those contracts came to be and all the procurement rules in Victoria, which are pretty strict, don't look like they are applied. I think that's a real question for the Auditor-General. Let's go to the other issue out today too, that international arrivals, so those people coming back to Victoria, they're going to be allowed to apply through a court system to appeal their detention. Now, they have to do it within 24 hours. This is a new plan from the Andrews government. It's in the Age newspaper today. The Victorian Department of Health confirming that they'll have the right to have their quarantine reviewed by independent lawyers. Now, come on, we either have mandatory quarantine coming into Australia or we don't. If it's going to be an appellate jurisdiction via the courts, I have to say, Victorians, lockdown number 4, I tell you, it's on its way. I mean, what's been your party's reaction to this, David?
Yeah, well, this is simply make it up as you go along. Just absolutely crazy stuff. We've had the Andrews government time and time again refer to health advice in terms of how we would proceed with anything, any decision. And now it's let's refer to legal advice. I mean, what is it, quite frankly? The government that has had 6 weeks after stopping hotel quarantine for the last blunder, and now at the very last minute awarding a panel of lawyers to effectively decide whether somebody's in and out of quarantine. I tell you what, money doesn't buy you everything when it comes to success, and the Andrews government is a great example of that. We've had $1 million a day to effectively have these hotel quarantine facilities operate with no people in it. And now we're giving checks to lawyers to sit there and to evaluate whether people should be in them or not, and whether they should get a free pass. It beggars belief in terms of the way we've been managing this. Why are we doing things differently than every other state? We've had so many disasters with hotel quarantine. Enough is enough, Daniel Andrews. I think Victorians have had enough. Let's run it like every other hotel quarantine in every other state is running things. Let's not experiment with people's lives as this government continues to do.